Brothers and sisters of the Warhammer universe, welcome back to Tortuga's Grim Rosaline. My name is Jeff, and today I'm going to show you how I paint a Grimdark Black Legion Terminator. We're progressing through November and getting closer to the end of my Black Legion chapter, even though between you and me, that new Christmas box is looking pretty amazing, and I might have to pick that up or convince my wife to get it for me as a gift. But before I move on to my next chapter, I made a promise to you that we'd be doing a fully resin Forge World Titan, and I always keep my promises. So end of this year, we're going to be doing that Titan, but it's going to be a CHAOS WarpLord Titan. I've been already busy at work fabricating body armor for the Titan build, as well as a head and different weapons, including a full-sized chainsword for a resin Titan, which I am pretty excited about. That'll be the end of this year. But before we get into this video, I need you to do those YouTube things that you do so well. Go down below, click like, share, subscribe, and now let's do this. So here's a list of all the paints that we'll be using on this build. We're going to start off with Citadel's Retributor armor and thinner. So we have already primed and based our Terminator with our airbrush using Vallejo's black primer and Game Air Black. And we're going to start right off with everybody's favorite thing, or most hated, depending on who you are, the dreaded CHAOS trim. We're going to use that Retributor armor, and we're going to paint all of the trim on the Terminator, as well on the weapons. And remember, we're using a metallic, so we're going to want to do 2 coats. That first coat is going to not come out as sharp as what you want. Don't worry about it. Just let that dry and follow up with that second coat. Next is Vallejo's Model Air Gunmetal. We're going to use the gunmetal to help make the multi-bolter stand out more against the Terminator armor. So we're going to paint the entire casing of that dual bolter with that paint. And of course, because it's metallic, we're going to do 2 thin coats. Up next is Vallejo's Game Color Gory Red and Thinner. So we're going to use Gory Red to paint the tabard, the grip of this power sword, and the trophy lock of hair off of his hip. I love this deep color of red, and I think this is going to be my go-to basing for all of my Black Legion for tabards, capes, and weapon handles. And remember, we're going to use 2 thin coats to really bring that deep red out. Next is Citadel's MournFang Brown and Thinner. We're going to use the MournFang Brown to paint the utility belt on the Terminator, as well as all of the pikes off the top of the Terminator. And I'm purposely using a brighter color brown so that later on when we're doing our washes and our Grimdark effects, that it will better stand out against everything that we're doing against the Terminator armor, and not just blend in. Next up is Vallejo's Model Air Copper. We're going to use the copper to paint all of the emblems on the Terminator, on the knees, the chest, the shoulder pads, and even the tips of the tusks. And just like every other metallic, we're going to do 2 coats to really bring that copper out. I started doing this with my emblems for 2 reasons. One is I want them to stand out against the black and gold, and I started doing this with my Abaddon miniature. And 2 is with the copper, we get to have more fun with different types of Grimdark effects. Up next is Citadel's Leadbelcher and Thinner. We're going to use the Leadbelcher to paint all the supports on the Terminator armor with the joints, the chains and chainmails hanging off the Terminator armor, the power sword, the metallics on the dual bolt pistol, and the spear tips on the pikes. You know I'm going to say it, and we're always going to do 2 thin coats to really bring out that Leadbelcher color. And with a once-over from our Terminator champion, everything is looking pretty nice so far. Next is Vallejo's Model Color White, Citadel's Baal Red and Thinner. We're going to use the white and Baal Red to paint the eye lenses on the Terminator helmet. We're going to start off with the white, and we're going to paint in those lenses. And we're doing this so when we put on that Baal red, it's really going to make it stand out. And after we let that dry, we can go ahead and paint the Baal red on top of the white, and if you want to, you can go a little over to give it a nice glowing effect against the armor of the helmet. Next is Vallejo's Game Air Bonewhite. We're going to use the Bonewhite to paint all of the fangs on the armor, the tusks off the helmet, and all of the skulls hanging off his hip and on the pikes on the top of the armor. And of course, we're going to do 2 thin coats of this to really get that nice Bonewhite look. However, we need to make sure we let that first layer fully dry before we start the second, so we don't have brush strokes showing in our paint. Next is Vallejo's Model Color German Gray and Thinner. We're going to use the German Gray, and we're going to paint certain areas on the plates of the helmet. We're going to paint the forehead plate, and then just under the eyes, there's a ridge area there of a plate that we're going to paint into. And what this is going to do is this is going to better show the shape of that helmet to the regular naked eye. Up next is Citadel's Yriel Yellow and Thinner. We're going to use the Yriel Yellow to paint the open mouth area of the emblem on the lower left leg. What I want to do here is I almost want to give it like a brimstone-esque fire coming out of this demon's mouth. And that Yriel Yellow is going to start with a great base. Next is Citadel's Ryza Rust. We're going to use the Ryza Rust as a base rust effect, and we're going to put this on the black armor in certain corner areas of the gold trim, on the lower legs, the hips, the lower back armor, and on the shoulder pads. So instead of doing brush strokes, I'm going to stipple in the areas that I'm going to put the rust effect onto the armor, and I want to do this so it doesn't look uniformed. And I'm also going to load the tip of my brush with the Ryza Rust because I want that textured look instead of a smooth stroke. Up next is Citadel's Nihilakh Oxide. So we're going to use the Oxide on all of the copper emblem areas on the knees, the chest, and the shoulder pads. And I will usually start this on a top of the emblem going down on all of the smooth, broad areas of the emblems. Anywhere that has a lot of definition or ridges, I won't put it on as much. And don't worry if it looks like there's a lot on there. We're going to go back around with the copper later on, and we're going to stipple to bring out that weathered effect. Next is Citadel's Evil Sunz Scarlet and Thinner. We're going to use the Evil Sunz Scarlet to bring out the highlights on the tabard against the gory red. So just like most other highlights, I'm going to look to see where the light is hitting first on the tabard. And that's where I'm going to start applying the Evil Sunz Scarlet. And I like to, especially with capes or tabards, I'm going to do brush strokes from the top of the tabard down. And as we take a quick once over on our progress before shading, everything is coming along really nice. Up next is Winsor & Newton's Lamp Black and Burnt Sienna. So this is my oil wash version of Argax Red Shade, and we're going to use this to go over all of the gold trim, as well as the copper emblems, and all of the black power armor, except for the helmet. And also make sure when you're doing this, you're going over any of the oxidization on the copper emblems and the rust on the black power armor. And the reason why I go over all of the armor with this is I like how it brings out a nice rich look to that black. But also, seeing that this is an oil wash, we can go back over with either a Q-tip dry or a little bit of mineral spirits and start taking off some of the areas that we maybe don't want that on later on. Next is Winsor & Newton's Lamp Black. So this is my oil wash version of Gnome Oil, and I'm going to use this on the sword, the dual bolt pistol, and all of the metallics, the spear tips on the pikes, the chainmail, any of the chains around, and even the pistons on the power armor. And again, we can be as generous as we want while applying this oil wash, because we can always go back through with a Q-tip, whether it being dry or a little bit of mineral spirits, and remove any areas or push the washes to other areas that we want it to really enhance. Next is Villainy Inks Goon's Grime. So we're going to use the Goon's Grime to go over the tabard, all of the skulls, bones, tusks off the helmet, and that ponytail top knot thing hanging off the side of his hip. And again, we can be as generous as we want while applying this, because we can go back over this with a Q-tip, a little bit of mineral spirits, and dab off any areas that look like it might be too much Goon's Grime. Up next is Villainy Inks Sector Rust. So we're going to use the Sector Rust on the metallic areas sporadically around to give a nice rust effect on anything on there, as well as on the armor around any of the areas that we did the initial rust areas, where the corners and edges of where the armor meets the trim. And again, here we can be a little bit more generous, because we can easily take away later on if it looks too overpowered. Next is Villainy Inks Coelia Green. So we're going to use the Coelia Green to further put in the oxidation on all of the copper emblems. So again, I'm just not going to broad put this on. I'm going to sporadically dab around to bring out a further enhancement of the oxidation from the first base ones we did earlier. And again, don't worry about being too overpowering with this, because anything that we think is too much, we can take off with a Q-tip later on. Next up is Vallejo's Model Air Copper. So we're going to use the Vallejo Copper to go back over all of the emblems and re-highlight all of those areas, as well as use it to kind of bring the copper back out on some of the areas that we did the oxidation on. Up next is Vallejo's Model Air Chrome. We're going to use the Vallejo Chrome to highlight all the metallic areas on the miniature, as well as enhance the sharp edges of the sword and the spear tips on the pikes. And the way I do my highlighting is I have two LED model lights above my hobby bench, and I will see where the light is hitting at different angles first, and that's where I'm going to start doing my chrome or whatever color at that point I'm doing for the highlights. That's where I start. Next up is Citadel's Retributor armor, Vallejo's Model Air Chrome, and thinner. So I'm going to be using this 2-to-1, 2 parts Retributor armor to 1 part chrome, to highlight all of the gold areas on the miniature. So that's going to include the gold trim on the armor, as well as the gold on the sword and on the dual bolter. And again, rule of thumb, always look to see where the lights from above are hitting your miniature at that point first, and that's where you're going to want to start with any of your highlights. Next is Citadel's Blood for the Blood God. You can't do Grimdark without a whole lot of blood, and Blood for the Blood God is going to give it to you. So we're going to use the Blood for the Blood God on the sword, on all of the skulls on the Terminator and the pikes, as well as any skulls on the base. And there you have it, a Grimdark Black Legion Terminator champion, looking so sinister that the hell in your nightmares itself spit it back out. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you might have learned something new that maybe you can use in one of your future builds. And like I always say, Grim for the Grim Rosaline.